Vice President for Strategy and Senior Fellow Iain Murray. Welcome to Free the Economy, Iain.
A delight to be with you, Richard.
So I'm happy to remind anyone who might not have heard that CEI recently published the study by Iain and myself on the last 50 plus years of the Liberty Movement and how it was inspired in part by a famous memo written in 1971 by Lewis Powell. The quick bio background on him: Powell was a lawyer, an Army officer. He was a Richmond, Virginia school board member and one-time president of the American Bar Association, who later went on to become a Supreme Court justice. And he had a lot of ideas about politics and policy and the direction American society should be going in. So, around 1971, the United States was in deep domestic unrest amid radical politics, university campuses, protests at the U.S. Capitol and the Pentagon, demonstrations, ones that even were turning violent. And anyone from a conservative background, like Lewis Powell, would no doubt have been alarmed at the general direction American society was going in. But his famous memo didn't talk so much about civil rights protests or the anti-Vietnam War movement, or those were very big issues at the time. He talked about how free enterprise was under attack. Why were those economic freedoms so important?
America has always been based on a free enterprise system. There have been hiccups along the way. The progressive era started the era of regulation of private transactions, economic activity. The New Deal significantly changed the relationship between employer and employee, and instituted a role for the federal government in just about everything. That was walked back, and very quickly we settled into a sort of a détente between the people who were suspicious that American capitalism was exploiting people and the entrepreneurs and the capitalists, basically. They don't entered into a détente. In the 1970s, it seemed that détente was under threat, and specifically under threat from the radical left. You saw the rise of identity-based movements. You saw the rise of the environmental movement. You saw the rise of, at the time, the consumer movement, all of which seemed to be deeply hostile to American capitalism at the time. And so Lewis Powell wrote his famous memo to the Chamber of Commerce, expressing ways in which this was a problem and suggesting some solutions.
Right. And so, Powell wrote about, left-wing ideologues trying to, undermine the property rights that, underpin a market economy. He, in proposing kind of countermeasures to his friends at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, one of the big, pro-business organization at the time. There's many more now, but at the time, the U.S. Chamber was one of the sort of go-to places when anyone talked about, business in America. And, the things he suggested were what all sort of political and advocacy and activist strategies that have become commonplace today, which is, send campus speakers to university campuses to talk about your ideas and buy advertisements and do sort of opposition research and keep up on what the other side is doing, and, do fundraising, finance lawsuits, all sorts of things that have become, entirely common and weren't entirely uncommon even then. But one thing I think is interesting, even though Powell doesn't really go into it in the memo, but if you try and want to get sort of in his brain and think about how someone like him would have been looking at the time, it's not domestic politics and activism that were the only game in town, right? So, in 1971, the U.S. was locked in the Cold War struggle with the Soviet Union and their whole sphere of influence. The Warsaw Pact had invaded Czechoslovakia just a few years before, and that was considered such a naked act of aggression that even other communist parties in other countries denounced it. So the Soviet, it's easy to look back today and say, oh, well, the Soviet Union is probably practically a spent force by then because everything collapsed by 1991. Well, no one at the time thought that, and it wouldn't have been reasonable to assume that. So the sort of like geopolitics that the United States was in the middle of at the time, between the Soviet Union, we were still in active combat operations in Vietnam, meant that the domestic threats from left-wing radicals who supported the Viet Cong and Soviets, among other forces, you had to combine the two, right, and to sort of to think about how would someone like Lewis Powell have been thinking about this at the time. And really, I guess my question is, how does the sort of like identity of being pro or anti-capitalist, how has that changed? Because again, in the early 1970s, we're in the middle of the Cold War. If you say, well, if you're a socialist, that could say like, well, you're like a traitor to your country, right? Well, you're probably supporting the Soviets, right? Our arch enemy. But obviously that environment is very different now, right? If someone says you're a socialist, it probably means you follow, AOC on Twitter, right? What does it mean that we don't have that sort of like Soviet threat that really was defined by economic systems so much?
I think it's extremely important. So I can demonstrate how much of an old fossil I am by saying that just a few years after Powell wrote the memo, in my native country of Great Britain, there was an absolute universal belief that East Germany was more of an economic powerhouse than Britain was at the time. Everybody accepted this, that East Germany, not even the Soviet Union, East Germany was more economically productive and powerful than the United Kingdom. Of course, a lot of that has to do with Britain's own experiments with socialism, which were teetering to, or sputtering, shall I say, to their timely end in 1979 when Margaret Thatcher was elected. And just a few years later, when we actually got access to the economic information of East Germany, it was revealed that Britain, even in those days, was massively outproducing East Germany. But nevertheless, this was a thought that this Soviet system of collectivization and the communist direction of the economy was an actual threat, an actual economic threat, not a military threat, an economic threat to the West, to America and its allies. So that was that was very that was the way people were thinking at the time. But of course, this meant that in other ways, alliances were different. American labor unions, for example, of the time, were strongly pro-free enterprise. They really believed that the American system of capitalism was producing the wealth that the working man could take a share of through the union system. So none of the union, well, perhaps some, but the major union leaders of the time were strongly behind the free enterprise system. So there was a different set of alliances in those days, and it's important to remember that context.
Yeah, speaking of shifting alliances, in recent years we've heard a lot about conservatives who are now some of our conservative friends out there who seem less interested in supporting free markets and more interested in taking right of center politics into what we call populist or nationalist direction, including happily ceding power to the federal government for more to plan economic affairs more. And this is often taken or often described as picking up with Donald Trump's campaign for president, launched in 2015. But one thing I've thought about this as also being almost as venerably old as yourself, that we've seen populist trends and threads in the conservative movement before. So, Ross Perot running for president in 1992, probably the most successful third-party candidate, certainly since Eugene Debs, the legendary socialist, ran for president multiple times at the beginning of the 20th century. His entire platform had to do with being anti-free trade and policies that supposedly would have supported, the working class. Very similar in many ways to the sort of Donald Trump populism and the populism that's sort of spawned since his presidency. How much do you think that this has sort of always been part of the right of center world of politics, and how much actually has changed since sort of the Trump effect?
Yeah, it wasn't just Perot. I mean, Pat Buchanan won several primary states in his campaign in '92 against George Bush. Ross Perot had one of his signature phrases, his catchphrases, if you will, was that there was a giant sucking sound from Mexico, that Mexico was somehow taking all of the American working class jobs. It's exactly the same sort of language that you now hear about China. China's taken all of America's working class jobs, despite the fact that manufacturing has never been bigger as part of the American economy than it is today. And what has replaced those working class jobs has been automation and technology, rather than necessarily outsourcing to a foreign country. But yes, this has always been part of the American conservative makeup. In fact, we must remember that President Nixon, the president at the time of the Powell memo, introduced price controls. No doctrinaire free marketeer was Nixon, and that's why this bunch of this tendency in the American conservative movement was always known as the old right. It was the right of the era of Nixon, of Eisenhower. It was the old ideas of how the economy should be run, and that's why I find it particularly interesting that the people who are resurrecting these old right ideas always call themselves the new right, when in fact, if anything, they're the older right.
Everything old is new again. Now, to the extent that we are facing some sort of realignment here, there's a reshuffle in the kind of post-Trump era. You've written about how there seems to be a change in emphasis in politics and in political rhetoric from identifying based on economic issues to identity issues. What does that mean for like coalition politics and getting things done in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that this isn't just happening in America. It's happening all over the world. In fact, the first sign that something like this was happening, I detected in 2012 when a party in Finland, of all places, a party could call themselves the True Finns, appeared from nowhere and got 20% of the vote. And in European proportional representation-based systems, there are many parties as opposed to the two-party system that we're used to. It's so much easier for these new identity-based parties to appear, and in some cases just completely wash away the old political system. If you look at France, for example, now the two big parties are Macron's technocratic liberal En Marche and the National Rally of Marine Le Pen. The socialists and the conservatives, the Republicans, who used to dominate French politics, have been completely washed away. Similar things are happening all over Europe. So and indeed most of the developed world. Brexit may have been a symptom of this focus on identity. Back when I was a Brexit, of sort of proto-Brexit activist in the 1990s, it was very much a minority. About 20% of people at the time wanted to leave the European Union. and now Britain has left the European Union, thanks to gaining majority. There has been a significant change all over the Western world in the way that the politics is focused, and because of this realignment, it has meant that the old focus, which was economics, economics no longer has that primary role. So you can't say to people, this will affect GDP and make Americans poorer. Yes, some people will still respond to that, absolutely. But it's not the main focus of the political argument. If you want to make an economic argument, you have to make it in different terms now. You have to talk about what it means to the American working man, or to the various identity groups that make up the coalition on the left of politics in the United States. This means that those of us who are free market economists have to rethink our ideas and our messaging in order to make them appeal to people. As the great founder of CEI, Fred Smith, used to say, that they won't care about you until they know you care. So we have to show that we care about these identity issues if we're going to have our economic ideas taken seriously.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you can see this sort of like shift in political rhetoric, but one of the things that sort of puzzles me is that there seem to be a lot of nationalist and populist, like writers and pundits and critics who are like overwhelmingly, as to use the like internet language, doomers. That they're gloom and doom, they're doomerists, they're very negative, almost fatalist, rather than the what I was thinking of the old sort of like Ronald Reagan version of nationalism, which is, we don't need the government to tell us what to do. I'm here from the government and I'm here to help, are the scariest words in the English language. American people are smart and strong and resilient and hardworking. We can handle our own affairs. We have the most freedom and the greatest productivity and all of these great things in the United States. All we need to do is government to like step out of the way and things will be great. Where did that optimism go? Like there used to be a lot of good, positive nationalist, pro-freedom optimism, and I'm not hearing quite as much these days of that.
No, I think the optimism is still there in the American people and American voters in general. I think if you appeal to the idea that America, that one of the central American values is freedom and opportunity, then people will listen to that. And I think that's that's one of the ways we need to be we need to be sort of realigning our messaging. You're right. There isn't a lot of that going on at the moment. And I think that one of the interesting things that our former Brooks Fellow, Tim Carney, found out about the last election when he wrote his book Alienated America was that the surest sign of a vote for Donald Trump over Ted Cruz was if you were worried about what was happening to your neighbor. That if people down the road were going to lose their job, then you were really worried about that. Generally speaking, the people who were at threat of losing their jobs didn't vote that way. They actually expressed optimism that things would change. So that sort of anger at what free markets are supposedly doing to America is more of a second-hand concern than a first-hand concern, and I think that's that's a problem. People have unfortunately have a very skewed view of what the economic situation is actually like in America. They think the manufacturing has been wiped out. No, as I said before, it's steadily increased as in economic value over the decades since the financial crisis. There are lots of things like this where people think that the economic situation is dire, but when you actually look at it, go to the ground, with a few exceptions, the economic situation is actually pretty good. There are lots of former manufacturing strongholds, for instance, that are now boom towns. They've re-engineered themselves, as it were, to be different centers of economic value. Yes, there are a few that are mired in the morass of despondency, but generally speaking, that's because of taxation, regulation, all the things that free marketers say will cause barriers to economic activity. Guess what? They are causing barriers to economic activity in places like these. So what's the solution? Well, free marketers have always said, get rid of the lower the taxation, get rid of the regulation, and let's see these places boom again.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if there's almost like a cognitive psychology angle to this, where we worry about threats even when even if they might be overestimated, because the cost of not worrying about them is too high, right? So we waste a little bit of mental energy and political energy by worrying about something that's not really a threat, but it would be worse if something was a big threat and we didn't worry about it at all. So because of that kind of like basic psychology, we tend to overestimate threats in general, because none of us have enough time all day, every day, to do a deep dive into every potentially problematic trend in the world. So, to a certain extent, again, thinking back to the old timey days when we were younger, if you were around the United States in the late 1980s, you would have been really worried about Japan, and you would have been really angry at some of the politicians in America for not standing up to Japan more, not safeguarding, all of America's jobs and manufacturing is going to go to Japan, right? Well, after 1990 and the Japanese economy went into recession and didn't grow much for the next 20 years, we saw obviously that threat was overhyped, and that the kind of policies that were recommended to fight the Japanese would not have helped. Right? Might have hurt us as much as any Japanese companies. And the last 20 years, look at the rise of China, right? China's had a huge, very impressive, rise in its general economic levels. It's its GDP. It's manufacturing as well, in part by adopting more market-based policies, not communist policies, by becoming less communist. But you had the same people who are saying China's eating our lunch. China's going to take over the world. China's going to put us all out of business. And I don't think the evidence is not there that's going to happen, that it has happened. We have a sort of like rebalancing all the time. Like the global economy is always going to rebalance. Investment income is going to go where they think it's going to find the best return, and that sort of thing. So there have been big changes, but the idea that the People's Republic of China is just going to like take over the world economy is sort of a scare story that is pushing, I think, a lot of people towards policies that they should be smarter than to endorse. So I wonder if you also see this as a cycle where it's, it was the Soviet Union, and they were supposedly, or in the case of your example, East Germany supposedly was going to outperform the rest of the world, and then the Soviet bloc was going to outperform the rest of the world, and then Japan was going to take over everything, and then China was going to take over everything. Are we just always in a like inferiority complex where we think someone else is going to eat our lunch?
Well, when you're the leader in the economic race, when people start to catch up to you, you start to worry. Zero-sum thinking takes over, and you think that, well, if they're taking a bigger slice of the global pie, then our slice must be decreasing in size, so we must be becoming poorer. When we know that that the global economy is not a zero-sum game. that China, or I suspect the next one will be India. India grows thanks to its amazing entrepreneurial people, and the final junking of the socialist system that has held India back for so long. All of a sudden, India starts becoming one of a global economic powerhouse. And yes, people are going to say that must mean that America will become poorer. Yes, it might become poorer relatively, but when it comes to the actual size of the global pie, it's growing, and there's enough there for everybody. But when it comes to China, the ridiculous thing is that we actually had in place a strategy to deal with China and to contain China through means of the Pacific Trade Alliance, known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That it wasn't perfect. Absolutely, I'll very much agree with that. But nevertheless, America had helped craft it and helped exported through this draft agreement a lot of American ideas about freedom and property rights and free speech and other areas which are not directly related to trade, but they were all there in this draft agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And for some reason, in 2016, both presidential candidates, I'm not going to give Hillary Clinton a pass on this at all, both presidential candidates opposed it. And as a result, the Trans-Pacific Partnership went ahead in a slightly modified form, which got rid of quite a few of those American ideas, especially about property rights. What we're left with is a slightly attenuated trade agreement, which was meant to help contain China, but America is not part of it. Instead, America has decided, it seems on both sides of the political aisle, that it will head towards autarky instead. As if America withdraws from the trading world, then China is going to have a bigger slice of that pie that remains, of that global trading pie that remains. And then people will say, well, this is disgraceful. America's losing out to China, even despite the fact that we're taking these steps that all the protectionists and anti-free traders say will help us. We're heading down a road when it comes to global trade that I imagine Xi and his bootlicking loyalists in Beijing are going to be absolutely delighted by, that America is just crippling itself and thereby giving more of a chance for China.
Well, yes, it used to be an old hippie bumper sticker, the phrase, "I'm already against the next war," if you're a pacifist. So I'm already against the next trade war with India. Even 15 years from now, when everyone's forgotten about China and everyone thinks India is the new boogeyman on the international scene, I'm all for constructively engaging with them and not starting the terrafor.
CEI should produce those bumper stickers, I think.
All right, this has been an excellent conversation, and even though we see each other in the hallway on a daily basis, it's still great to talk to you via Zoom on a podcast. So before we go, just a reminder, everyone, you can find our study, Threats Then and Threats Now, about the Powell Memo on CEI.org. Should be on the front page for a while still. And where should people look for you and your stuff, Iain?
Well, you can follow me on X, and I'm not going to say formerly known as Twitter. Oh, hang on. I X there as @ISMurray. And my work is regularly showcased on CEI.org and places like National Review. So you can generally find me.
All right. Follow @ISMurray and keep up with all of the Anglo-American hot takes. Until next time, we'll see you.